All right, good evening, everyone. Sorry, Baruch Hashem, a lot going on here tonight. Schus Baruch Hashem to be able to continue in our shir this evening. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for tonight's shir. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, the Tilson Mishpacha of Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drashos this year as a schus for Besoros Tavos Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Josh and Becca Friedman, in creation of the yahrzeit of Josh's father, Yisrael Yehuda Ben Rav Chaim Rafal Zichron Levracha, Sammy and Malka Esters in the memory of their parents, Yitzchok Leib Ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, and Hinda Bas Hanech Ephraim, in memory of their dear friend, Naftali Yona, Ben Beatrice Miriam, and Daniel Yigal. And our shir for tonight, dedicated by the Lerner family, in creation of the yahrzeit of Chani's father, Chaim Shlomo Ben David Schneer. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah. The families in Nechama, all of those who need a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu should Emir Hashem bring home our hostages b'shalom and b'karov, and our holy soldiers should be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedeihem. With that, let us begin. So I want to focus on what I think is an incredibly dramatic episode in the parasha. If you take a look at source number one. So remember again, Parashas Vayeshev, the stories in these parashios, they pick up at such a dramatic pace. So right, again, just 2 weeks ago, Yaakov and Esav were born, and again had their brotherly struggles. And now again, in this week's parsha, Yaakov is back in Eretz Canaan, settled, 12 sons, and then of course the strife between the brothers begin. So if we take a look at source number one, Vayikhu es ketonas Yosef, Vayishchatu sirizim, Vayitblu es haketonas badam. So if you remember again, a little bit of background, Yosef and his brothers do not get along. And of course, that's putting it mildly. There is a tremendous amount of brotherly animosity. Now, the root of that animosity, and it's even more than just animosity, it's hatred. It's hatred. The Torah uses the lashon of Vayisnu'u oso. The brothers literally hated Yosef HaTzadik. Now, the source of that animosity, whether it was warranted, that's not our topic for tonight. The point is, brothers stand ready to go ahead and kill Yosef. Instead of killing him, they go ahead and they sell him into servitude. They, of course, can't come back and tell Yaakov what they did. So instead, they go ahead and they concoct a story. They take the coat of Yosef, they soak it in blood, they bring it to Yaakov. They don't overtly lie to Yaakov, but rather, again, they allow Yaakov to construct his own narrative, and they don't go ahead and contradict it. So Yaakov sees the blood-stained coat of his son, and he says, "This is the coat of Yosef. Chaya ra achasu. A wild animal must have consumed him." Vayikra, pasuk, source number one, pasuk lamed daled. Vayikra Yaakov simlosov, vayasem sak b'masnav, vayisabel al bino yomim rabim. So Yaakov Avinu tears his clothing, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son for many days. Vayakumu kol banav v'chol banosav lenachamu. All of Yaakov's sons and daughters rose up to try to console him. Remember again, each of the Shvatim, each of the tribes, was born with a twin sister. So Yaakov Avinu again had sons and daughters. Some say it was those daughters, others say it was his daughters-in-law. His family gets up to try to console him. Vayima'ein lehisnachem. But Yaakov was unconsolable. Vayomer ki ered el b'ni evel sha'ola vayevch oso aviv. So Yaakov Avinu says, I will go down to my son to the grave mourning. I will go down to the Sheol, to the depths, mourning for my son. And Yaakov continued to perpetually mourn for his son. And again, this mourning went on for over 20 years until he finds out later on that, of course, Yosef is alive and well, Viceroy in Egypt. So remember, as we've been asking over the last couple of weeks, when it comes to these stories, we always have to ask ourselves a basic question, which is why? The Torah is not a storybook, right? The Torah is not here to convey to us familial information. The Torah is not here to convey to us biographical information. Stories are only brought down because of their moral, ethical, or legal implications. So we understand again that the events between Yosef and the brothers are of crucial importance. But why does the Torah have to tell us about the profound mourning of Yaakov Avinu? Yaakov is upset. Yaakov is depressed. Yaakov is sad. Yaakov says essentially, I'll never be happy again. Why does the Torah have to go into such incredible depth regarding the mourning of Yaakov Avinu? See, interestingly enough, the Gemara understands there is something fascinating. The Gemara says in number 2, Al tifku lameis ve'al tenadulo. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Yirmiyahu HaNavi, where Yirmiyahu says, Al tifku lameis ve'al tenadulo, weep not for the dead, neither bemoan him. So the Gemara says, Al tifku lameis, what does it mean when Yirmiyahu HaNavi says, don't mourn for the dead? How can you tell a person don't mourn for the dead? Rather, yoser midai al tenadulo, yoser mikashir. Do not excessively mourn. So it could very well be that what the Gemara is highlighting over here is from Yaakov Avinu we are learning what not to do. There's a way to mourn. Judaism has a script for everything, including mourning. So there is a way to conduct one's self in the midst of Avelos. And the way one does that is to maintain a level of control, to maintain a level of self-discipline, to maintain a constant emunah. One doesn't lose themselves in their grief. And therefore, it sounds like what the Gemara is saying over here almost is that the Torah is teaching us from Yaakov Avinu almost what not to do. This level of excessive mourning is not something we do in Yiddishkeit. Ha Ketzad. So the Gemara says, so how should you mourn? Shlosh yamim lebechi, 3 days for crying. Shiva lehesped, 7 days for eulogies. Shloshim legiyutz letispores, and then another 30 days for prohibitions. Now, leaving aside that the amounts that the Gemara is highlighting over here don't have to be exact, but the point that the Gemara is making over here is that everything has a measure, right? Everything ultimately, again, has to be done with some level of precision. So, Mary, Shifa, can you do me a favor? Just go and close that door to the back of rooms 2 and 3. Thank you, Shifa. Thank you. So everything is done ultimately, again, with precision. And therefore, the Torah is telling us that Yaakov Avinu perhaps mourned too much. Now, there's a lot of reasons why Yaakov Avinu mourned too much. Rashi in number 4 points out here something amazing. Rashi says, Vayimoyli Isnachim, Ein Adam Yochel Lekabel Tanchumin Alachai V'Saver Shemes. Remember again, there's a good reason why Yaakov Avinu could not stop mourning, right? Why? Because again, interestingly enough, HaKadosh Baruch Hu programmed us with this fascinating thing. This ability to go ahead and essentially move things from the consciousness to the subconscious. When a person encounters loss, a person assumes that loss is going to be primary on their mind for the rest of their lives. And then something amazing happens. You never forget your loved ones. You never forget the loss. The loss is always there, and the loss is always a part of you. But it's almost as if it goes like from the frontal lobe a little bit into the subconscious. But thank you. But that's only something that happens with the dead. Why wasn't Yaakov able to stop mourning over Yosef? Why not? He was alive. So therefore, again, amazingly enough, Yaakov Avinu steeped in this profound sense of mourning. Steeped in this profound sense of ongoing mourning that he's unable to go ahead and get out of. And amazingly enough, Rashi points out why. Because Yosef was alive. And therefore the internal mechanisms that allow us to move forward in life were not able to really go into effect over here because Yosef was still alive. Okay, the Sforno writes over here, number 5, something amazing. The Sforno writes, he says, Vayimoy le'esnachim, ma'an l'shmoa divrei tanchumin, kedei shlo lahavir daigo melibo. So interestingly enough, so the Sforno says, Yaakov Avinu refused to be consoled. Now that's interesting, by the way, right? If you notice the Lashon over here, it doesn't say Yaakov wasn't consoled. Rather, what does it say? He refused to be consoled, right? Which means what? He prevented himself. He would not allow himself to experience consolation. Now, what does that tell you? That consolation was possible, but he refused to avail himself of that. So the question is, why? And the Sforno goes on and he says, Vayomer, ki ered el b'ni evel sha'olah, because Yaakov Avinu said, I'm going to mourn for the rest of my life. Kibel alov avelos l'chol yamav mipnei she'ira hatakala al yado sheshalach es Yosef el achiv. Oh, so now the Sforno gets into the kishkas of this. Why is Yaakov Avinu inconsolable? Why won't Yaakov Avinu accept any level of consolation? Why? It wasn't just that he lost his son. He felt that it was his fault. Why was it his fault? So the Sforno says, because remember the story. You write, the brothers are out shepherding their flocks in Shechem, and Yaakov sends Yosef to check on his brothers. So Yaakov Avinu sends Yosef out into the middle of nowhere. Now, one of the interesting things, this is not a topic for tonight, one of the interesting things to consider in general is, did Yaakov Avinu ever know what happened to Yosef? Right? Because if you notice again, we know I don't want to ruin the end of the story, right? But Yosef is alive and well, he's successful, right? He's viceroy, as you said before, and they're reunited. And the one thing you would think that Yaakov Avinu would have asked Yosef was, how did you get here? Right? In other words, the last thing I have of yours was your blood-stained coat. So just explain to me how you got here. So there's a big machlokes on the Farshah, a big dispute amongst the commentaries, whether or not Yaakov Avinu ever knew what the brothers did to Yosef, or that he never found out. And if he didn't find out, was it because that Yosef never told him? Or maybe because, sometimes in life, you actually don't want to know what the truth is. And maybe Yaakov just did not want to know what happened to Yosef, because whatever it is, he knew that it would incriminate his other sons. In any event, the Sforno says something amazing, that Yaakov Avinu felt at fault over here. Why did I send Yosef all alone into the wilderness? Why did I send him all alone into the fields? He's one boy, his brothers weren't with him, he was all alone. This is my fault. Now the truth is, and if you take this a little bit deeper, and if Yaakov Avinu had his suspicions that maybe the brothers did something to Yosef, Yaakov also knew the state of tension between the brothers and Yosef. He knows that, right? How does he know it? Because at the beginning of the parsha, what happens? Yosef goes in and tells his dreams. And what's the brothers' reactions to the dreams? They despise him. In fact, they really despised him even before the dreams. And they despised him ultimately because Yaakov played favorites. Yaakov favored Yosef over everyone. The brothers despised Yosef because he was Yaakov's favorite, and they despised him even more after all of his dreams. And says the Sforno something amazing. Yaakov Avinu is walking around with a bucket of guilt. A bucket of guilt. And he cannot offload it. It's not just that my son died. It's not just that I lost my child, which is overwhelmingly tragic and in and of itself difficult to move forward from, but it's my fault. It's my fault. And the Sforno understands, because it was his fault, this is why he refused to be consoled. Some people don't believe that they deserve consolation. Just like some people don't believe that they deserve forgiveness. Yaakov Avinu felt, I don't deserve to be consoled. After I shirked my responsibility for my child, right? What's a parent's sole obligation for their child? The core obligation is to protect our children. Now, every parent also knows, I can't protect my child from everything, right? I wish I could, but I can't. And Yaakov Avinu, says the Sforno, is saddled with this overwhelming guilt that this was all me. So again, all fascinating interpretations. But I'll share with you one more. In number 7, Rav Saruskin, the Aznai Torah, says something amazing, and he gives a very novel interpretation. He writes, so if you look back at number 1, just go back to the pasuk for just 1 second again. The pasuk says, Vayakumu kol banav v'chol benosav l'nachamo. All of his sons and daughters got up to console him. Vayimoin lehisnachim. He refused to be consoled. Vayomer ki eret el b'ni evel sha'olah. I will go to my son, I'll go to the grave mourning. Vayevch oso aviv. And his father cried. His father cried for him. So the Aznai Torah of Saruskin points out that last phrase seems to be so strange. It already told us he was mourning. Why do you have to say that his father cried over him? And listen to what Rav Saruskin says in number 7. He says, Vayevch oso aviv is not a reference to Yaakov. It's a reference to Yitzchak. Yitzchak Avinu was still alive when Yosef went missing. And Yitzchak, a father, saw his son Yaakov suffering so traumatically and so terribly that not only was Yaakov in a constant state of mourning, but Yitzchak was mourning over his son Yaakov. What a compounded tragedy. So Yosef, as far as they know, died a violent death. Yaakov Avinu is inconsolable, and there's nothing worse for a parent than seeing their own child in an inconsolable state. So Yaakov's inconsolable, Yosef is gone, and again, Yitzchak is a mess because of the state in which he sees, the emotional state, the emotional disrepair in which he sees his son Yaakov. These are all incredible, and all overwhelming insights. But the truth is, we're still left with our core question about why is it here? Why is it here? Right? In other words, remember, stories, everybody loves Vayeshev, right? Let's be honest. Vayeshev is the favorite of all the Chumashim. It's okay, I said it, you don't have to say it. Right? It's the favorite. The stories are great. They're so profound. You get to see family dynamics. It's also very assuring to see that your family is not the only dysfunctional one, right? But Lamaisa, again, dysfunction was part of all families from the beginning of time. It's very affirming. But at the end of the day, what am I learning from this? So Yaakov Avinu was inconsolable. Thank you. What's the message? In other words, what am I, the reader, supposed to take with me from this episode? So I want to share with you something absolutely amazing. If you take a look at source number 8, there is an incredible book by Dr. Maurice Lamb. Now, everyone knows the first book of Rabbi Lamb's, which is The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning. Now, but what people don't realize is Rabbi Lamb actually has a second book also called Consolation. It is an incredible and overwhelming work. The truth is, The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning is incredible. You know, it's always interesting that generally, when do we learn about Avelos? When we're in the midst of it. So I've always felt like it doesn't, and we do that purposely. People are very touchy about learning Avelos before they have to. The only problem with learning about Avelos or waiting to learn about Avelos until you're in the midst of it is you're not prepared. You're not prepared. It's kind of like learning the halachos of Pesach on Erev Pesach, right? Imagine again if somebody gave you the guide to kashering your kitchen on Erev Pesach. It doesn't quite work. There are certain things in life that need an incredible amount of preparation. How to deal with loss and the ripple effects of loss is enough to derail a person from life. A person has to be prepared. But in any event, Rabbi Lamb writes a different book called Consolation. And he says something absolutely amazing. He says, in bereavement, source number 8, there's much more to this than what we're going to do here tonight, but I think this is a profound piece and has an incredible tie into the parasha. He says, in bereavement, people experience different levels of acceptance at different points in the process. Acceptance does not imply that we like what has happened, nor does it mean that we forget our loved one. It means that we appreciate the magnitude of what has happened, that we know that our lives will never be the same, that we must learn to live with our loss and to accept the reality of the person who has been lost, both for the good and the not so good. To accept means to realize fully that this tragedy has happened to us, unreal as it may seem, that God has decreed it, that it is utterly irreversible, and that no amount of imagination or hope could ever bring the dead back to life. That life has changed forever. That rebelling against that change will be of no avail, and that we must allow the pain of absence to flow through us. So I just want to point out, by the way, just so you understand, the profundity of what Rabbi Lamb is writing over here is not just about death. It's life. It's life. Everyone has moments in life where you experience loss. People experience loss from all kinds. Yes, sometimes loss comes in the form of death. Sometimes people experience loss. You could lose a career. You could lose a friend. You could lose a relationship. You could lose a way of life. You could lose so many different things throughout life. So what do you do in the wake of loss? So it's interesting because often what people do is people resist. They resist the reality of the loss. They do not want to give into the idea that the life that I have is different than the life that I wanted for myself. And so they resist and resist and resist. And where does all of that resistance get you? Where does it get you? Absolutely nowhere. Just profoundly frustrated and utterly exhausted. Rabbi Lamb writes, and this is such incredible gadlus, is the most important thing with dealing with loss. And that's why I said loss, however you're going, whatever type of loss you're dealing with, is accept it. Accept it. I mentioned this before. There's an interesting halacha in Shulchan Aruch. The halacha says in Hilchos Avelos that a mourner is not allowed to say, I wish I could change these circumstances. Right? I would give anything to change this. Now, it sounds so strange, because what is the most natural thing for a mourner to say? I wish I could change this. Right? Why does the halacha forbid it? Why does the halacha forbid it? Because it's an exercise in futility. You can't change it. You can't change it. So why are you using your time and why are you using your energy in a futile fashion? What halacha says is, accept it, lean into it, recognize that, this is the new reality. It's not a reality I thought I would have. It's not the life I thought I would have. It's not the circumstances I thought that I would find myself in, but this is it. This is what I got. So I could fight against it. I could wag an accusatory finger heavenward or other people saying, it's not fair, you did this, you did that. And that's true, maybe you're entitled to that. But none of that is going to change anything. Instead, the best way to deal with quote unquote loss or adversity is accept it. Lean into it. Accepting means that we are willing to relearn reality. This to me is like most incredible thing. It means that we understand that at some point we must end our impossible wish that the person we loved will return. It means being ready to clear psychic space in which to continue to love the deceased on a spiritual level. So again, I just want to point out here, obviously the focus is death. But I want you to broaden your understanding of this and appreciate that this doesn't just apply to death. This applies to any type of life loss that a person undergoes. Unblocking. So again, this idea, you can underline these, the sheets are yours. Accepting means that we are willing to relearn reality. What a profound idea. What a profound idea. How much time do we spend being angry that life didn't go our way? How much time do we spend being upset that things didn't exactly materialize the way we had dreamed it or thought it? Okay, and where does that anger, where does that frustration, where does that disillusionment get you? The answer is nowhere. Gets you absolutely nowhere. Acceptance means, this is what I got, and then how do I maximize the circumstances I have been giving? Look at the next section, unblocking a path to healing. As a philosophy for mourners and others learning to live with pain and frustration, the idea of acceptance can be a powerful healing tool. Affirming death in its full terror can be a surprising source of serenity and an antidote to months, perhaps years, of denying, ignoring, and struggling. Get ready for this. The Bible provides an early example of this dynamic. Yaakov, although he rends his clothes to indicate the tear in his heart after the death of Yosef, refuses to fully accept that Joseph has died. He takes the news that his sons bring him as a news of loss, not of irretrievable death. You hear this distinction? So since he cannot bring himself to accept Joseph's death, he does not heal. Now, in the biblical narrative, this is all to the good because Yosef is in fact not dead, but alive in Egypt, as Jacob finds out later. But Jacob's lifelong unresolved grieving does demonstrate that there could be no healing without stout-hearted acceptance. If you want to heal from your trauma in life, whatever your trauma is, everybody's got trauma. So whatever your trauma is, if you want to heal from it, the first thing is lean into it and accept it. This is part of my life. This is part of who I am. I can't change what has occurred. When I accept, I'm willing to relearn a brand new reality. Yaakov Avinu refuses to accept. And because he refuses to accept, he is unable to relearn a new reality. And understand what that means. Yaakov Avinu. This is Yaakov Avinu. What did Yaakov Avinu accomplish during the 22 years that Yosef was missing? What did he accomplish? Nothing. Nothing. Almost 2.5 decades of life wasted. Sitting Shiva for 22 years. Right? Why? Because he would not accept. And when you don't accept, you can't relearn. And if you can't relearn, you're simply stuck in place. Accepting, the third page, accepting the unchangeable does not require resignation or refusal to use our talents and abilities to live life to its fullest. So this is incredibly important because sometimes when we hear this word acceptance, we and this is incredible, we kind of use acceptance and resignation interchangeably, right? Acceptance just means I accept where I am, I accept what this is, and now I can maximize. Resignation means almost like an admission of defeat. I'm defeated. Life didn't go my way. I resign myself to the fact that life didn't go my way. I yield. I give in. Acceptance just says, I accept. Life has not gone my way. These are my new realities, and I'm accepting my new reality, and I'm going to relearn how to maximize. Resignation is giving up. Acceptance is a pivot. Goes on. Rather, it can liberate us from crippling and counterproductive emotions, such as anxiety, fear, guilt, and remorse. This is the test. Here it is. It's incredible. So how do you know what's acceptance versus resignation? So he says, we need to ask ourselves, is there anything I can do about this problem today? If there is, I will do it. If there isn't, I will accept the predicament and not dissipate my soul and my stamina in senseless struggle. Out of such acceptance comes true serenity. What an again, like I said, this you could apply this to everything in life, not just death. Here's the test. Can you do something about it? If you can do something about it, great. Roll your sleeves up and do something about it. If you can't do anything about the circumstance, acceptance, relearn your new reality, pivot, and maximize the circumstances you have. Robert Frost said it eloquently in 7 words. The best way out is always through. It's great. Acceptance means bowing to the inevitable, accepting life as is and not as if. We slowly come to recognize that the only aspects of life that we can control at will are not life or death, our own or others, but rather our attitudes and perspectives on what befalls us or bereaves us and how we choose to react to them. We simply cannot blow the shadows away. We cannot renegotiate the past, only commemorate it and put it into service as the prelude it was meant to be. Getting through is the only way to get to the highest level of grief resolution, which is transcending grief, a different time. But that cannot happen unless our grief has been processed rather than skipped over. To accept is not to succumb. It is to survive with the past intact. It is not what we have lost, but what we have left that fashions a future. The great Harvard philosopher William James summarized the truth of all misfortune. Be willing to have it so. Acceptance of what has happened is the first step of overcoming the consequences of any misfortune. Don't fight if you can't beat it, accept it. Incredible. And now when we take this, we understand exactly what the Torah is trying to teach us. You know, there are 2 different ways Torah teaches us things. Sometimes the Ribbon Shalom teaches us lessons from our great Avos and Imos based on what they did, and sometimes it's based on what they didn't do. And we see many different examples of this, right? The Torah tells us the whole story of Sarah and Hagar, recorded in the Ramban, right? The Ramban explains that Sarah Imenu mistreated Hagar. And because Sarah Imenu mistreated Hagar, to this very day, there's animosity between the children of Hagar, the Ishmaelim, and us, the children of Sarah Imenu. Sometimes the Torah teaches us positive lessons from the actions of the Avos and Imos, and sometimes what not to do. The Torah goes into such incredible depth regarding the grief of Yaakov Avinu, because the Torah is coming to teach us a profound lesson. Don't do what Yaakov did. Yaakov refused to accept. Now again, so you understand, Yaakov, to a certain degree, it's not fair, right? Why isn't it fair? Yaakov wasn't able to accept, right? Why wasn't he able to accept? Because Yosef was alive, right? So Yaakov Avinu, again, I want to point out, the Torah, this is not like a culpability issue. Because that's why Rashi goes out of his way to say, how could it be that someone like a Yaakov Avinu wouldn't be able to accept his new circumstances? So Rashi explains it's almost as if he couldn't, right? The circumstances did not allow for that acceptance. But at the same time, the Torah is teaching us, the Torah is showing us what happens when you don't accept your new reality. What happens when life gives you circumstances that you did not want, creates a life for you that you thought you would never have, a reality that you never imagined for yourself? What do you do now? What do you do now? So you have 2 choices. You could refuse to accept it, and what happens then? You're just stuck in this struggle of non-acceptance. And you can't move forward because you're refusing to accept what is. Or, I could accept. And once I accept, I recognize these are my circumstances, this is my reality, and I could relearn to live life a different way. Yaakov Avinu loses out on 22 years of his life because he refused to accept. And by the way, if you fast forward a little bit, you'll notice something amazing. I didn't put this on the sheet, but you know, in a couple of parashiyos from now, when Yaakov is reunited with Yosef, and you remember again, Yosef brings him to meet Paro, and Paro asks Yaakov, right, how old are you? But it wasn't like how old are you? It was like how old are you? Like, in other words, Yaakov Avinu looked ancient. He looked ancient. And Paro thought he was so much older. And Yaakov Avinu says his age, and he says, my days were mu'atim v'ra'im. They've been few and they've been bad. Now, by the way, you never hear of any of the other Avos and Imos ever describing their life as bad. And each of them had their own bumps in the road. Each of them, right? Sarah Imenu was barren for the overwhelming majority of her life. Until 90. Barren. Never did Sarah Imenu ever utter a negative word about her life. Avram Avinu loses his life partner, has to we're willing to sacrifice his son Yitzchak, never a complaint. Rachel, Rivka, interestingly enough, Leah voices pain. And it's pain about her marriage, right? And her pain about her not feeling loved by her husband. But no one ever says anything like, my life is bad. Yaakov Avinu was the only one who described his life as being bad. And it's interesting, why him? Why did the challenges get to him more than anyone else? And the simple answer is because out of all the avos and imos, it's interesting, right? Let's go back to Leah for just a moment. Remember again, if you look at Leah, right? What's the most painful thing about Leah Imenu's life? What's so painful? Let me say it differently. Where do you see the most acute nature? What is the most acute manifestation of Leah Imenu's life pain?
The Judaism? No.
I'm sorry? No, but where do you see it? Where do you see her pain most acutely? I'm sorry?
It wasn't the choice.
Right, but where do you see it manifest itself? You see it manifest itself in the way that she names her children. Remember again, the birth of a child is a happy thing. Is a happy thing. She names her first son Ruvain. Right? What does Ruvain mean? Ra'ah Hashem ba'ani. Hashem has seen my suffering. It's a really strange name for a kid, right? A really strange name. So where did Ruvain come from? Oh, my mother really felt unloved. And it's a really, Shimon, Shema Hashem calling ya. Hashem heard my suffering. Levi, Hapam Yilav, maybe my husband now will love me. But it's interesting. You get to son number 4, Yehuda. What does Yehuda mean? Hapam Oda es Hashem. This time I will thank Hashem. What does that mean? What happened in Leah Imenu's life? What happened? Acceptance. Leah Imenu also struggles with the fact, right? What person, in general, it's always fascinating. You always see, as much from a biblical perspective, that polygamy, having more than one wife was permitted. One thing you see about all polygamous marriages was they never work. Right? Which makes sense. There's no way it could possibly work and create something functional. Right? So it's understandable that Leah, again, remember, in all fairness, Yaakov never signed up to marry Leah. He never wanted to marry Leah. He said, I'm sure she'll make a great sister-in-law, right? But he never had in mind that she was going to be his wife. In fairness to Yaakov Avinu, nor do we ever find that Yaakov Avinu goes ahead and ever did anything bad to Leah, right? Remember, again, a lot of Leah's feelings about her marriage were internal. It's about how she felt because, again, it's understandable. Leah knows that her husband didn't want to marry her. Leah knows that the only reason she was married to Yaakov is because Yaakov was tricked into marrying her. That is a heavy burden to live with day in and day out. So you want to talk about a person whose life didn't go according to plan, right? And contrast this, right? Avram was so devoted to his wife Sarah that Avram Avinu was ready to remain childless than to take another wife, right? Avram didn't suggest Hagar. It was Sarah who said, you have to marry Hagar. Yitzchak, despite all the years of infertility, would never take another wife besides Rivka. And so again, this is the chain. So now Leah is this woman who's foisted into a life that she chose it, she actively went in, but it certainly did not end the way that she wanted it. Really, and by the way, it never turned around for her. The Leah Imenu narrative is a tragic one. Leah never had the life she wanted. Never. But the greatness of Leah, and by the way, the greatness of Leah is that son number 4, Yehuda. Yehuda becomes Hapamod, I'm going to accept. I'm going to stop being so upset and so negative and so jaded about how life did not go my way. And I'm just going to accept this is what it is. Yaakov's a great guy. He's never going to love me as much as Rachel. That's the way that it is. Not because he's bad. It's just because he never wanted to marry me. So I'm not going to have that in my life. I'm going to accept that. And now with that acceptance comes new reality. And you want to know something even more amazing? Who comes from Yehuda? So David HaMelech. And who comes from David HaMelech? Mashiach. Mashiach comes from acceptance. Redemption and salvation in life come from when you are willing to accept your circumstances and relearn how to live life in a new way. The Torah goes out of its way to teach us a story about Yaakov Avinu, because this is one of these episodes. Torah is going into great depth and telling us, don't do this. Don't do this. Because at the end of the day, when Yaakov Avinu comes to Paro, and Paro says, what's going on with you? And Yaakov says, my life's been terrible. Really, Yaakov, your life has been terrible? I don't know. I mean, not an easy life, but all in all, Baruch Hashem, Yaakov Avinu has something that his father and his grandfather didn't have, which was all of his sons perpetuated his legacy. Avram had a Yishmael who went off. Yitzchak had an Esav who went off. Yaakov Avinu was the first to have 12 sons who were solid, who were committed. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. You did have a loving marriage with Rachel. Granted, it ended very early, right? You have your life is terrible. But from Yaakov Avinu, now in retrospect, realizing there are 22 years of wasted time. There's 22 years of just Shiva. There's 22 years where I refused to accept and lost out on so much. And when you look back retrospectively and realize all the time that you've lost because I've been unwilling to accept the new realities in life, that hurts and it's irreversible. You can't change it. So the Torah Kedosha goes into such incredible detail to teach us this incredible lesson. That when life doesn't go our way, when we suffer that loss, whatever that loss may be, the best thing we could do is accept, and with acceptance comes the ability to relearn how to live a beautiful and incredible but different life. Refusing to accept keeps us mired in our current painful circumstances. Ability to accept transforms us from a Yaakov into a Leah Imenu. And just like Leah's Yehuda becomes the source for all future salvation, our ability to accept new circumstances, pivot, and relearn how to live life gives us the possibility of personal salvation as well. All right, we'll stop over here for tonight. Next week in Meretz Hashem is our pre-Chanukah shir, right? When is Chanukah?
Hanukkah's Wednesday.
Chanukah's Wednesday. Good. Wednesday night, good. So next Tuesday night, the Meretz Hashem will be our pre-Chanukah shir, Meretz Hashem. Shemech everyone.